Good evening. This is Chase Bailey from Left Bank Films. Our second episode of our podcast, The Love of Film, deals with our favorite comedies and other genre of the 1940s. Our podcasters tonight are Kate Jurdy, Dennis Collins Johnson, Brigitte Abreu, Freeman Fletcher, Todd Hunter, and myself, Chase Bailey. I hope you enjoy it. So this week we're going to do the same order, number three first, and then we talk about them. And Dennis, you're off to number one.
Well, my
Number
friend,
three. I'm sorry, number three.
number three, yes. Well, my number three choice, and it was very difficult. First of all, I have to tell you my little list, which was Arsenic Olay's Philadelphia Story, His Girl Friday, Bishop's Wife, Woman of the Year, and my third choice, for real, The Great Dictator by Charlie Chaplin.
Ooh.
And The Great Dictator, pretty bold, for a guy to write it, star in it, produce it, direct it, score it. I mean, what a tour de force. So, and the fact that, some people afterwards said, well, you can't make fun of dictators like that. They're killing millions of people. Well, sometimes humor is the best weapon, because everything's overly serious. So I think it's a great film. I've watched it a number of times. He really skews Hitler, or in this case, Adenoid Hinkle, and playing two parts. Not only that, on top of everything else, playing two parts, playing the Jewish barber as well as the fascist dictator. What else can you say? His first sound film. Charlie had a hard time letting go of silent films, and rightfully so, because he was the master. Not that there weren't other great people, but to come out with this one in 1940, really 20, 30 years after silence went bye-bye. Well, 20 years after silence went bye-bye. 10 years. Okay, I got it. Anyway, that's my choice. Great film. Always have loved Chaplin. I still love watching his silent films. His comedy, I learned incredible amounts from his physical comedy, his timing, and it seemed to become natural to him. Yeah, he had a lot of experience doing shows, the English equivalent of vaudeville in England. But wow, genius will out, and his certainly did. I just have to say in passing that when our mutual friend Gene McDaniels, when I was working with Gene back in the 70s, we went. A&M Records was really the home, and I went there a lot with Gene. And A&M Records was housed, and I think still is, in Chaplin's old studio that he had built way away from town, that even in the 70s was right smack dab in the middle of Hollywood. And had I really been aware that it was Chaplin's place, I kind of knew it, but I kind of didn't care because there was a whole lot more going on. I would have asked to explore the place and looked at it from an historical point of view, which I didn't. But looking back, it was an experience to be there, to think of all the vibes that were there that I was kind of ignorant because I was only in my early 20s. Anyway. So there you have it. There's my choice. I could discourse on for hours about that. Really, I couldn't. But Chaplin's. I just want to say Chaplin's cinematographer Roland Totherow did a number of things with him, and I don't remember exactly what else at the moment. But the cinematographers a lot of times made or broke a film. In fact, sometimes when Gene and I talked about doing films, we said, well, we're first-time directors, but we know what we want. We get a great cinematographer and tell him, okay, make this happen for us. So I think in a lot of ways, a great director can do that as well.
Well, you're on now for your number three.
My number three is directed by, I just want to double check the year, Charlie Chaplin, written by Charlie Chaplin, based on an idea by Orson Welles.
Oh, yeah.
But it depends on who you talk to and what you read, that it was fully written by Welles and Chaplin bought it off him, or that the idea was based on and Chaplin wrote it. I'm going to go with the latter, and it's Monsieur Voodoo, which was Chaplin's basically last film with the. I think it was the last film in the United States, and it was his last film with the Tramp, and I loved it so much. And I actually sent a message to Chase. I wanted him to watch it. I loved it so much. But it's just, I mean, it's so trite to say, but Chaplin is a genius, based on a true story about a French murderer. But he intertwined too, based on, I think, a French and then a British. So they were true stories of two convicted murderers in Britain and France. And he's basically this like Bluebeard character who married. It was during the Great Depression. He fell on hard times, and he was. Do you guys know about it, or do you want me to give you a quick synopsis of what it was?
Yeah, I've seen it a bunch of times, but go ahead.
A quick synopsis would be good.
Yeah, okay. So he basically fell on hard times. He was a banker during the Great Depression. He had a wife and a kid who we only really see once in the movie. And, yeah, right? And they were great. And it was fantastic. And you see, actually, I want to interject. Well, I'm going to come back to that. And he, to make money for his family and to do good by his family, he does a lot of really bad. And he hooks up with these wealthy socialite widows and murders them and takes their money.
And makes a comedy out of it.
And makes a comedy. That's why I'm smiling, not because of the
let's kill somebody else.
But yeah, I mean, only Chaplin can make it comical, right? And Martha Ray is brilliant.
Yeah.
She's so great. But I want to go back to when they you're introduced probably like midway through the film, Dennis, to his family, his kid and his wife.
Yeah, about midway.
And you see
to Mona and the kid, yeah.
He's basically himself in it. Like some of the things he was saying, they were talking about getting together with friends, and this person does this, and his son says, "Daddy, why don't we eat meat?" And he said, "We don't because we're vegetarian." And he was a vegetarian in real life. So you're seeing throughout the movie, that's just one snippet, parts of who Chaplin really was. And throughout, you get these anecdotal phrases of, these just pieces of gold that Chaplin has written and intertwines into the movie, and mini monologues that, much like The Great Dictator, show a great side of humanity, of culture at the times. And I just love how Chaplin, like, I don't know, in Hollywood, I just find like it's great to touch on cultural topics, and then people
social commentary, yeah, for sure.
Social commentary, but in a good way, right, with Chaplin. But I think a lot of Hollywood kind of jumps on, this is hot right now, we've got to make something on this. And Chaplin is just kind of like, paraphrasing when he said, "I do what speaks to me and how I see the world and what I want to share with other people and what I can basically create behind the art form that I do. And it's not really whether or not someone else likes it. It's, does it work for me and does it speak to me?" But although that might sound selfish, and he's probably one of the most selfless filmmakers by doing that, because he creates such unique pieces of art with his genius in creating, writing his own compositions and scores. And people don't realize all that he does behind the film unless they probably study film, or he directs, he writes, he writes the composition. And he's just brilliant. And I love that. I mean, it'll break your heart if you haven't seen this film, but you laugh through it as well. And I mean, he was basically getting blacklisted in Hollywood, and then he had to leave the country for that and other reasons. And you see all of that in the film, and in the end, he bids adieu to Tramp. So I don't know, if you haven't seen it, I could go on and on. I already have. Number 3.
Yay.
Yay. And I totally concur. It's one of my honorable mentions. because I just loved it. And thank you, Kate, for introducing me to it, because I didn't really know that film until you told me a couple of weeks ago to watch it. And I just loved it. I just absolutely loved it. It's a phenomenal film. Well, if you think about the way the film was structured also, it was more modern than it was old-fashioned. Rather than being chronologically shot, it was shot in a fashion that you go, okay, who are all these women that he's and there's one scene, so a long scene, where he's been invited, not invited, but he's the groom at a wedding of one of the women that he's gonna.
Martha Ray.
Martha Ray
shows up.
Martha Ray shows up, who he's already married to, and she's a guest at the wedding where he's going to be the groom. And it's just a funny scene, just the way that it's all put together.
You know, it's very episodic, built around him, but the episodes basically having to do with each one of the women that he's involved with.
The ending, without giving anything away, if Freeman or Bridget or Todd have not seen this, I don't know if you guys have seen this film.
No.
My Chaplin exposure is I've seen a few of his earlier silent comedies, and then I've seen Limelight. Like, that's it. So I've seen the beginning and I've seen the end.
Well, talk about social commentary in the end of this. I mean, it's just it's like a big FU in a lot of ways. I mean, and that's why he stood. There's this one quote. It's actually taken from, I think, I don't know if the gentleman was a poet, but it's not his words, but he used it. He said, I can't remember if this was the trial or if this was the end, Dennis, but he says, one murder makes a billion, millions a hero. He's very outspoken about war.
That was a very good scene.
Yeah. So it definitely is provocative. People don't want to be provoked. I do. Provoke me. But he just he's very provocative, and he challenges the status. I've already gone on too much and eaten up too much time, but I'll talk a little bit more about it. But in closing, it's not the funniest, but I look at Oscars, not that I want to compare what we're doing to that. And you guys, how many films were put under, I think Matt Damon made a joke because it was one of his films, or put under a comedy category that really aren't. And there were other great comedies. I want, maybe in my next number 2, I'll make a list like Dennis did. I saw probably about 10 or 12 films, and I'll let you know about that. But it was masterful. I mean, a work of art, and just blew away so many other of the films, including Howard Hawks films, which is one of my honorable mentions. I couldn't rightfully put that ahead of this, so that I'll leave with that.
Fantastic. Brigitte?
Oh, it's me. Yes, my number 3 is Hail the Conquering Hero, which is a Preston Sturges film, and it kind of mirrors my third pick for the dramas, because it's about veterans coming back home, but it's like the comedy version of Best Years of Our Lives, which is I forget his name. What is it? Woodrow Truesmith. What a great name. Comes back home, but he doesn't tell his family that he's coming home. He's been honorably discharged because he has hay fever and like can't stop sneezing, and so has been discharged from the military. Didn't see any action, didn't see anything, and he meets this like group of Marines, I think it is. And they're like, one of them is like, you haven't told your mother you're home. That's a terrible thing to do to your mother. And he calls her up and he's like, we're going to bring you home and you're going to have a hero's welcome. And the whole town believes like all these stories that the Marines tell to them of like, yeah, he's, look at all these medals. They're like not his medals. And the whole time he's just caught up in this horrible lie that he's this hero. And, you know, the girl that he loves is like, you know, with another guy now because she was like, I didn't know if you'd ever be coming home. But that guy was also discharged for having hay fever. And like, you know, it's just a whole thing. And in the end, he does come clean about it, you know, that they're like having him run for mayor and stuff. And, and he's like, listen, like none of this is true. And it's so like heartbreaking for his mom. And then they all just decide that they value his honesty and they still want him for mayor. And it's like, oh, wow. You know, it's just a really beautiful, really well done ride. You know, the more that he protests, no, I'm not a hero. They're like, he's so modest. And it's just the best.
I can't wait to see this one because
Yeah,
it's about the Marines. I didn't know anything about it. I just looked it up on Rotten Tomatoes, and sure enough, it's about the Marines in San Diego, which is where I went to boot camp. So
Amazing.
I can't wait to check this out.
It's
Not
a
in
great
World War
ride.
II, though. Not in World War II.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, you'd be one of the last guys. Preston Sturges had a great run of 7 or 8 films that he got to write and direct because he started out with an Academy Award-winning script. But you know, he tanked and he died penniless. I mean, it was really a meteoric rise to this crescendo of these wonderful comedies of which this is one. And then down it went. The IRS was after him, took everything. It's just like I couldn't believe it that
He
would
died midway through writing his autobiography titled "The Events Leading Up to My Death,"
I forgot that.
which is the most Preston Sturges thing ever. Hail the Conquering Hero is like, I think it's in that upper echelon. Like that whole run of his in the 40s is incredible, but I think it's Hail the Conquering Hero, The Great McGinty, and Unfaithfully Yours are like the top ones for me. And Hail the Conquering Hero is definitely a hilarious and also kind of like stomach turning watch because you're like, this isn't gonna go well.
Well, I stumbled across Preston Sturges the first time I was going to do a show in Philadelphia, and we had a hotel there the night before the show, and on their cable channel was Palm Beach Story, which is another one of his really cool films. And I watched that, and I was like, wow. And so I very slowly watched the rest of Preston Sturges's films because having read about him, I didn't want to burn them all up. So I waited like 2 or 3 years in between each one to see the next one, and it was well worth the wait.
You did that with me when I was a teenager watching James Dean films. I was like, so let's watch Giant. You were like, no, next year.
We're gonna run out of them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All 3 of them.
television appearance.
Yeah.
Okay, Todd, you're next.
Well, my number 3, since we were doing comedy and others, I went with others, and I actually went with 1948's Howard Hawks' Red River.
Cool.
And one going into this completely ice cold, seeing who the top 2 performers in it is, might think to themselves that this is a comedy because you've got John Wayne and Montgomery Clift. But the thing is with Red River that always stuck with me is what a generational battle it is throughout it. I mean, if you haven't seen it, it's John Wayne plays a character, a cattle drive. Someone who's been running his own cattle drive for about 14 years. His name's Tom Dunstan, and he's going to be ready to. It's like his final job. There's always a final job. He's going to drive this 10,000 head of cattle back to market in like Missouri, which is 1,000 miles away, and part of his crew, along with Walter Brennan, that's going to be going in is his son. Matt, played by Montgomery Clift, because the first thing you think of when you look at Montgomery Clift is obviously John Wayne, is his father.
It's his adopted son, am I correct?
It's his adopted son,
Yeah.
That's right, it is, because he had survived a Native American attack, that's right. But now Matt's grown, and he served in the Civil War, so he's got his own opinions about things. And what I really enjoyed about this film is that it's a slow burn over time. You see the two of them kind of picking on things about each other, and then as the film progresses, things get more and more heated. The divisions with the cattle drive get more set down in the middle, and most of all, you really start to see, which was shocking to me, because you associate, the John Wayne with being like, the classic American cowboy sort of thing, and in Red River, he's a bastard. He's like a fascist. He's cruel. He's very, very cruel about things, and you really start to hate the guy. I mean, there is mutual respect.
Like in real life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
And I think John Ford famously said when he saw the movie, he was like, I didn't know the old son of a bitch could act. But I also wonder how much of it was acting, reportedly Wayne and Cliff didn't get along, which is not surprising. But Wayne did respect the fact that Cliff could like stand up to him, which he had to in the movie. And Wayne was like, all right, no, he does a good job. But I just think it ages well because you have that generational conflict going on, again, even today, between, say, boomers and millennials and zillennials and all of that. I take Gen X out of the equation because, we seem to always be out of the equation on everything. So I'm just everything by the sidelines.
We are. We are.
Better for worse.
That meme, right, Todd? We share that meme, right?
Yeah, we're the middle children of history. But Red River, it resonates in terms of the youth, quote unquote, standing up to dictatorships. Essentially, Dunstan was running the cattle drive like his own personal dictatorship and acting out in some very cruel ways. And we still see a lot of that today, politically, culturally. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Stop complaining about everything. You don't have it so bad, and you start seeing all these divisions. So I do think that it's an interesting John Wayne movie to watch, because Wayne isn't necessarily the hero.
He ain't the good guy, right?
He ain't the good guy. And that was what kind of threw me. Like, I was totally expecting that Cliff was going to be like this annoying kid in it, and he turned out to be the one I was rooting for the entire time.
Yeah, I think that's important.
And the film sets itself up like that. And I think in a particularly macho decade, the fact that you've got Hawks, you got Wayne, and you got Cliff, the fact that the film, more or less takes Cliff's point of view, is kind of actually a bit radical for its time, I still think, in a little more of a challenging way to go with it. So that's my choice for number 3 for other.
Nice.
It's probably also my favorite John Wayne movie, if only for that reason, because it doesn't have the rampant racism of, say, like The Searchers, and you also have Wayne being seen through a much more complex lens, which I can appreciate, decades and decades later.
Certainly was shocking to see him play a relative bad guy.
Yeah.
When I saw it the first time, I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
Wait, I want to go back and watch Stagecoach again, because this has ruined my John Wayne for me. But
was it startling at the time to see it that way? What was it like?
It was, because we hadn't seen him. I hadn't seen him in films where he was like that, where he was mean. Undeniably mean. And I think I'm with you. You really take Montgomery Clift's side, because he's much more understanding and kind, basically. And so eventually they have to clash, and that's what sets up in the movie. The parallels with Mutiny on the Bounty are really strong, though.
Yeah.
Really strong. Yeah. I read that somewhere.
I kind of wish I explored the category of others. I really did stick with comedy in this, but I do love Howard Hawks. and Walter Brennan, and listening to you talk about this past, and the fact that 40s films were so cutting edge, and they are still in a way on par with today. Like some of the styles were ahead of the time, very kind of progressive and controversial topics, even still for today. So it's on my list now.
Okay. I'm also not particularly well versed in 40s comedies, so it was a bit of a cheat.
I wasn't either at all. I had to do serious research. I messaged Chase and I messaged the group. I'm like, I was thinking of Bridget. I'm like, I can't find a foreign affair, Billy Wilder's film, which kind of was in the categories that we were discussing of, he really stuck it to them doing that one. And he's so great, right? I know everyone loves it, but I'm like, I can't find it. I'm going to have to order it. So I was kind of in the same boat, Todd, but I'm psyched. I've got it on my list now.
It's interesting that
I love that one.
Something that I had come up for me during this process of like looking at the genre of comedy, and I tried to do that too, Kate, where I was like, oh, I'm just going to do like the things that are the funniest to me that still tickle me. And it was a lot harder than the dramas. And it really had me reflecting on how comedy changes a lot more generation to generation than drama does, because drama really speaks to like your heart. And there's something, it's like we always get, it's like there's just something very eternal about it, which is why I think we have Greek tragedies and not Greek comedies. You know what I mean? It's like what they found funny, probably not as much what we're gonna find funny. I saw a Greek comedy once. It was terrible. Like I was like, what is this? It was called Women in Congress and it was supposed to be funny. I was like, how dare you? The joke is that women are leaders? Fuck off. So it's interesting that comedy changes so much. I mean, it really does. It ages like milk in some ways.
I love it. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, compared to drama, there are some things, obviously, that's why we're doing it, is that there are some things that stand up. But
it says something about physical comedy, about broad comedy, about even slapstick, is that it's pretty much funny all the way around. I mean, you watch Chaplin silent films, they're funny, but as soon as you get into more complex things, then the humor reflects the society, and society changes, even if people are the same.
Exactly. It's like people from my generation really don't have that, like, it's almost like you have to switch modes of like, oh yeah, like slapstick physical comedy is like not as much of a thing anymore. And when people watch it, it's like they just have to like get into it. It's an interesting, it really is so cultural and like of the moment. Comedy is very, I don't know, it's just such a different, it has a different tenacity, I think.
I agree. And off of what you were saying with that too, Bridget, I think what my generation is experiencing right now, again, the middle children of history, is that we grew up in the 70s and the 80s with a lot of really offensive comedy movies, like not even tongue-in-cheek comedic offensive movies, but like really, like you go back and watch them, and I completely admit, I find myself having to shift, and you start laughing in an uncomfortable way because you remember laughing so much at these jokes,
right?
But at the same time, you as you've gotten older, you're just like, oh, that's probably not the best thing. That's great, but
someone stopped me before I go too off the rails, but I was watching reruns of Friends the other day, and I was like, Friends is really like homophobic. There's like homophobic jokes in like every other scene. And I was like, I loved this growing up. How? But it's good. It's like good writing. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's like my ear can like tune to that because I grew up with it kind of. And then there is that shift that you spoke about, that catching up a little bit.
We could definitely go down a very deep rabbit hole right now.
Yeah.
With Netflix and Dave Chappelle.
I saw
his comedy special last night about his
but instead of getting into that, do you want to say your number 3?
I could spend an hour on that because I grew up in a different generation. Dennis and I did, and it was okay to do this, say that. But we understand now, as we get older, oh God, if I were living today and doing what I did back in the 50s and 60s, it would be taboo. It would be, but you have to grow and learn. But I still have fun. So my number 3
I just want to add physical comedy, our generation, Todd, when you prefaced it, and I totally agree with everything you're saying. I was actually just thinking about that recently, watching things, and I'm like, oh, this isn't even funny anymore, you know? And not only that, but it's offensive. But I was thinking of John Ritter and how fucking great he was as a physical comedian. So that's what when we talked about slapstick and physical comedy, my rose-colored glasses, I think of John Ritter, and I think he's one of the best of the 20th century. So
Same.
I love
Also, I find this all very tone deaf because Todd said that Red River was his favorite John Wayne movie, and I happen to know that The Conqueror is his favorite John Wayne movie, where he played Genghis Khan. So,
Oh, you're
what the fuck, Todd?
Yeah, that's
He
rough.
had cancer
Right?
from that film. We can't count that. That killed him and a bunch of other people.
That's true. It did kill a ton of people.
So Chase, your third is?
Yes, my number 3 is I love comedies from the 1940s. It's so hard for me to pick them. And all 3 of them are comedies. All 3 of my are comedies because I just loved them. And it was very hard for me to select my top 3, and I moved them around a lot. But number 3 for me is The Philadelphia Story by Cukor.
I knew it.
I knew it. I mean, she was Katharine Hepburn. I love fucking Katharine Hepburn. Whatever she does, whether it's, and I won't talk about some of the other films she does because they're on my list. But Katharine Hepburn was, to me, the single most strong woman out there. She kicked ass on screen. She kicked ass with her characters. And the Philadelphia Story, I mean, it's silly, it's stupid, about a bunch of rich people getting married, and she invites her ex-husband to the wedding, which is stupid and silly, but just the scenes, they go on and on, whether she's out swimming and carried back, and her new groom, her new fiance it's just, there's so many great scenes. And the other thing I loved about their comedies, and Dennis, you can explain this better than I can, but they were just so fast paced. Ta, ba, 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 overlap, 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 go, go, go. And to me, I just loved it. They talk over one another, they go past one another. And to me, those kind of comedies grab me. His Girl Friday, it's like every one of those. And then, of course, it's got Cary Grant, Jimmy Stewart, Katharine Hepburn, Houston. What's his name? Not John Huston. The fiance for Katharine Hepburn. I've forgotten his name now, but he was a famous actor back in those days. And then Cukor, just to me, he was a very good director, just an extremely strong director. So Philadelphia Story, for those many reasons, are my favorite. Is my number 3. My number 3.
One of the reasons is you've got a really good script there, and you've got a play that had a good opportunity to run and find out what was funny and what worked, and then you put a great cast into that great play, and holy smokes, it really cooks.
And the part was developed for her. The part was developed for her, and it was her comeback in Hollywood. She was never going to come back to Hollywood. Right. It was like she went away to the East Coast, totally, hated, labeled box office poison. Yeah. I mean, people didn't connect to Katharine Hepburn. They were like, who is this like weird, who talks like this? And like, like people were like, what? And
you did that well. Say that again.
She talks like this. Yes. Oh, how are you, darling?
You got your good mid-Atlantic accent going, Bridget.
I love her. I think she's great, but it's also very it's interesting that was her ticket back to sort of the top of Hollywood and the billing, and she owned part of the rights of Philadelphia Story, so that if it ever was filmed, she would get to play that role because she knew Hollywood didn't want her to be in it. and she was friends with the playwright.
What's the most famous image
And
from that
she-
film that people who've seen it, can you remember? Mine is, I think it's Carrie pushing her in the face and pushing her back down through the door.
Oh yeah.
Right. Because I mean, that was for her to say, yeah, do that, sure. It was like, wait, I'm trying to make a comeback, and you're going to deck me? No, but they made it work. It's great.
My favorite scene was just when Grant is carrying Hepburn back in his arms, after they've gone swimming. Just that whole repartee with the reporter there and his fiance there, just how that all went down. I just loved it. I love the pacing too. The pacing was super.
Yeah.
Jimmy Stewart won an Oscar for that, and I
No, he did.
don't necessarily know if it was his best performance or if it was one of those where they like owed him one from a previous performance that they gave to somebody else. But he does have one of the best drunk performances of all cinema in that movie. That whole part where she's kind of seducing him, but they're both just plastered is so funny. And romantic. And then that movie's other trick is Philadelphia Story is my number one. Spoiler alert. But the other trick of that movie is it has, for my money, the second best, and the first best we'll get to. My second best or second favorite screen pairing, which is Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn, who I think they did 4 movies together. I've seen 3 of them, and they're all. Q-Core did one with them back in the 30s. Chase would have been on a list if we had done the 30s. Called Holiday, which is, I think, my favorite of all of them. Holiday's amazing, and then they also did Bringing Up Baby, which was a disaster financially. I think that's part of what killed her career.
That was
but
one
it
of
is
many
one
flops.
But a great film nonetheless. Great film.
That movie's
What were they?
so funny. I have a leopard.
I enjoyed Bringing Up Baby.
Yeah,
that's one that ages well. It's funny. It's funny like that. Audiences hated it. They didn't get it.
Yeah, weird.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're not giving it your all, it's like the most insufferable movie ever because it's just a bunch of people talking really fast over each other and like being really stupid. But that's what's funny. So like, you have to pay attention. But yeah, and again, Holiday is my favorite of all those. Definitely. That's such a great movie.
Okay, Freeman, you're number 3.
So my number 3. I want to preface this by saying I have not seen The Great Dictator.
What?
Yeah, but my number 3 is a similarly controversial release at the time, which is Ernst Lubitsch's 1942 To Be or Not to Be, starring Carole Lombard, Jack Benny, and Robert Stack. It was Carole Lombard's last movie. She unfortunately died in a plane crash, famously. She has a many amazing performances. One of them, the highlights being My Man Godfrey. But she's incredible in To Be or Not to Be, which is the story of this like really crappy theater troupe in Warsaw during the Nazi occupation, and it's a farce. And when you first watch it, it's one of those where you're like, "Yay, this is in bad taste." But it's also there's a great video essay on YouTube by the incredible Lindsay Ellis, where she talks about why. Mel Brooks as the producer still works today, whereas a lot of comedies that kind of try to discuss Nazism and 1940s Germany and Europe and all that really kind of fall apart. And it's because, Mel Brooks had a way of doing it, and I think To Be or Not to Be also has it, where they lampoon the Nazis. They make it's a hilarious skewering of them, but it's also I was making dinner, so I was just listening to it earlier today. But it's there's always it never undermines the threat that these characters are in. So there's a very palpable dread and throughout, and it goes to very dark places, but it also comes right back. There's this amazing Jack Benny basically is like the ball in a game of tennis between this Nazi professor and this and spy and this Nazi general, and like on paper it sounds really terrible, but it's really really funny. But yeah, so To Be or Not to Be is my number 3.
Did you watch the Criterion edition?
I own it. I watched it on YouTube though. So.
What's different with that edition? Anything?
Well, I have it too. It's got extras. I mean, the print is like extraordinary.
I haven't explored the extras or anything yet. Yeah, Todd and I are big physical media junkies. So
we are, and the Criterion To Be or Not to Be is absolutely, a must own for.
And one of the great poster arts for Criterion. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was always amazed at that film, that Jack Benny, because I was so used to seeing him in the Jack Benny show when I was growing up, that he could handle a part like that, in a movie. I don't think haven't seen him in another movie, but yeah, it was good.
Dennis, what's your number 2?
I got to say one thing about To Be or Not to Be. I watched the film. I'm a Jack Benny fan. Alan and Gracie, Don Amici, all those early comedians. I just didn't like him playing Hamlet in those tights. It just looked awful to me.
Wait, that's the point.
I know it was the point.
There's even a line in it where one of the rebellion, or not one of the underground leaders is like, I can't believe we're putting all of our lives in the hands of a ham.
I didn't even get it to the honorable mention list. I'll tell you, I had a hard time watching it, but I do love Jack Benny, and I do love the premise.
I do want to say about Jack Benny that if you watch, if anybody's not familiar with the Jack Benny show, damn good writing back in the 50s television. Very good writing. I mean, for all the shows back then, you can watch and you go, kind of, but wow. And if you can get past his relationship with Rochester, which wasn't that bad, but still subservient. But wow, the writing and the humor, those guys had it, whoever they were. I watched that and I couldn't believe it. Some things just aren't funny anymore, but that one still was.
My ex-wife and I used to listen to, the Bickfords, Jack Benny, Groucho. We listened to them all. I mean, those were fun in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
And, Jack Benny, just in the film version, it was a physical thing. It was a mental thing. I just couldn't get beyond it.
Wasn't the guy we were used to seeing.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Or listening to, I should say.
Or listening to, yeah.
He did do a TV show, but I don't think I've seen many of those. With Rochester, it was always turned me off with Rochester.
Oh, it's great. They're actually great shows. Check one out. One, you'll be hooked because they're very high quality, and unbelievably so.
Okay, Dennis, number 2.
I was just talking. Now I have to interrupt myself. Okay, well,
time out.
Wait, I just started.
Who was the director on To Be or Not to Be? I'm sorry, I couldn't find that.
Ernst Lubitsch. Mel Brooks also remade it in the 80s. I haven't seen that one yet, but
I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, I don't think it's as good, but
I've heard it isn't as good. I think isn't it him and Anne Bancroft?
Probably.
Like real life wife.
Ask your wife if you can. Who like honey? Me. Okay, well, number two, I'm going to shift my number two because it was going to be a Philadelphia Story, but
We covered that.
we talked a lot about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to
And-
scramble now. Shit.
I'll
I
rearrange it.
have to go. Bye, guys.
Well, I'm going to pick one that probably nobody's seen, and I had never seen it, but Grace and I stumbled across it a few months ago. For some reason, it's Cary Grant. Cary Grant always comes up in these things. Why is that? He's in every one of my choices almost. Cary Grant, David Niven, and Loretta Young. And The Bishop's Wife, it's a fantasy where Cary Grant plays an angel who comes down, and David Niven is a reverend, I guess you would say, and he's trying to get a cathedral built. And so he's asked for guidance, and Cary Grant comes down to give him guidance. He thinks he's come down to help him get money for the cathedral. But what's really cool is the casting. Cary Grant falls in love with his wife, who's Loretta Young, and who wouldn't? I mean, angel or not, you know? So, yeah, he falls in love, and then the machinations that come from that are really, and Cary Grant manages to do his, what would normally be 40s broad humor. He settles it down, and it's still funny, and his takes and his, you know, his asides and his looks and all of that. They're not huge and broad like some of his other things, but it's very, very good. And the cinematographer was Greg Toland, who also did Citizen Kane. So you know you got quality cinematography. And I loved it. Originally, they were going to switch the casting, and Cary Grant was going to be the Reverend, and David Niven was going to be the angel. And Cary said, "No, I'm taking the angel part." And I guess he had more pull than Niven did. Couldn't imagine it any other way, because David Niven does a heck of a job in his character too. So it's a Christmas movie. If you haven't seen it, time's coming up. Check that one out. It's beautifully done, beautifully shot, beautifully acted. It's a fantasy, and you have to accept certain things as far as premise goes. But wow, really a cool film. And it doesn't get great reviews. I looked up some of the reviews, Bishop's Wife on Rotten Tomatoes and some others, but in my mind they just didn't watch it carefully, because you're watching masters and female masters at work as well. Brilliant cast, great film, really.
A beautiful film. I loved it. I haven't seen it in years now. I want to go back and rewatch it, but I remember that film, and it was wonderful.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so there you have it.
Kate.
Great. So we're moving to Kate.
Kate
Hey
the
guys.
Great.
Yeah, so my number two is Arsenic and Old Lace. I think it was filmed completely in 1943, right? Bridget's a fan.
41 actually.
And then it was released in 44.
Right.
Oh, okay, I read somewhere it was 43. Yeah, they had to wait until the Broadway run. Starring Cary Grant, Peter Lorre, my favorite. And I think Todd's a fan of Lorre, Bridget as well. I love Peter Lorre. He makes everything better. He's just so fantastic.
Great supporting actor, yeah.
Oh, he's so good. Gina Dare, Josephine Hall, of course, the two aunts. What actor wouldn't want that role? Like, it's so
And
great.
they originated it on Broadway. They were the original.
Were they?
Yeah, they were.
They definitely gave
most-
a theater element to it, so that makes sense, Bridget. Thanks
Yes.
for. You guys
most
are
of
going
the
to be able to
cast-
help me with a lot of the history. What's
Most-
that, Raymond?
I thought most of the cast originated those roles. I know
I think it was.
I know
just
the guy who
two
played. Oh, was it just the two aunts? Okay.
Well, the other one I know, it may be more than just them, but the one that I know wasn't included was Boris Karloff, because he
Right.
was originally the evil nephew,
Brother.
Jonathan. And there are all
Brother.
those
The
jokes
role I
about how
played
he
in
looks
high
like Boris
school.
Karloff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were the only two that were released from the production on Broadway, because they figured it wouldn't kill it to lose the two ladies like they would have. Boris Karloff was basically the featured performer, because it wasn't Cary Grant on Broadway leading the charge like in the film.
Well,
So
Massey
that was
did a
like
good job.
What's that?
Massey did a good job.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did a great job.
Yeah, that joke within a joke, right? He looks a little bit like Boris Karloff. They just kept saying that, so I
Yeah.
was like, anyway, I'm an easy audience, can you tell? But directed director, of course, our favorite, Frank Capra, later known as Capricorni. But I've got to say, I think kind of what you guys were talking about with It's a Wonderful Life, his films, I mean, talk about the marking of a great filmmaker. His films still not only resonate, but they're relevant today. I don't know, I mean, on the subject of Hollywood recycling, not that I like to compare, but it's hard not to. I would say maybe Steven Spielberg is the closest in modern day to what Frank Capra did in terms of, you know, just he has a way of creating this fantasy within a reality where the viewer just gets lost. And I laughed pretty much through the whole thing of Arsenic and Old Lace. And not really a screwball comedy, but bouncing off what Chase said, and I'll mention it in my further in the future in my honorable mentions, which is the skill that it took to do physical comedy. It's not like, oh, that's so great, we have to give them props because they did that. No, it was like nonstop, and the hours are so crazy on film, and even back then more so. And they are like boom, 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 overlapping dialogue. I mean, His Girl Fridays pops into mind is just like unbelievable. And there was a little bit of that here, but just Cary Grant's like, I watching him, I couldn't believe how many modern day comedians base them, like some of my favorites, like John Cleese. He was reminding me of Basil Fawlty on Fawlty Towers.
Oh yes,
you know,
I never thought about that.
Yeah, so many. Well, I grew up watching Fawlty, and I couldn't believe, Chase, how many modern day comedians, and when modern day I'd say like 70s and beyond, base themselves. And he was like you know, not only just like a sounding board, but like the basis of what they created their own physical comedy and own comedy gestures, movements, how the delivery of a line. I laughed through the whole thing. The cops were unbelievably not dismissive because they were trying to do the right thing, but just so dumb, for lack of a better word. But I loved how everyone was wrapped up in this Capra world of how beautiful film is, how wonderful it is to create. Everyone had the dream of being a screenwriter, whether you picked that profession or not, because Cary Grant was in the profession in the film. And it just was, and I thought Priscilla Lane was wonderful too. It was just a great.
Hello, Priscilla. Goodbye, Priscilla. We really
for
didn't
real.
hear much after that, you know.
Really? Is that happen? Did that happen?
I looked up what happened to her, and she just became like a housewife, and that pretty much. She had a bunch of kids.
She was perfect in that. You know, I wanted to call attention to Jack Carson, who plays the big cop, because he was the consummate second banana in so many films. In the 40s,
yes.
And he could pull it off, play the bumbler, the fool. And I remember one of the films he was in was, I think, Doris Day's first film or second film, and he fell in love with her, and he was playing second banana in there, where somebody else gets the girl, but he was in love with her and approached her, and he got dumped, just like in the films, you know. But he was really great at those kind of parts, you know, broad comedy.
Now he was the cop that had the screenplay, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I loved him. Absolutely.
So
loved
funny. He's great. And you're just like, oh my God, help. I mean, it was just to the point of being annoying, where it was like, help this guy. He's like ball gagged with talk and like.
Yeah, it's like, no, you're gonna listen to my second act.
Listen, now I got you right here. And then Peter Lorre, the description. Oh, so the man wanted in Washington, goes under the pseudonym of Doctor, bugged out eyes, German, and you just see Peter Lorre like no, Jonathan, please, not the slow method. Let's really quick.
Jonathan.
He's got a great line at the end, which is very subtle. And they go, "Doctor, are you leaving now?" And he goes, "Yes, please."
Yeah, so many good things. And I need a drink. I can't do this without a drink. You know, like, let's have a drink. Let's have a glass of wine.
And always having that prop decanter of wine there.
Yeah.
I just loved it.
The focus,
Such a great, I literally laughed through most of the film. I don't know. I don't know how you guys felt about it. I know some of you have seen it, but it's just it was so well done. I
Well,
love it.
I
number
didn't
two.
like the film at all. Not at all. It's my number one. So
It's my number
spoiler
one.
alert.
My number
Oh,
one.
Your number
Yes!
one.
Arsenic
You
and
asshole.
Christmas party.
You're.
I have to switch my number one. What do I have left?
Bridget, I
also-
had a feeling it was going to be your number one. I'm like, I wonder, because I know you love Catherine. I'm like, I
I
wonder
do.
if Bridget's going to do.
I watched it. I showed it to a bunch of different people. I showed it to a friend of mine who is 89, I believe, for the first time. She hadn't seen it.
Really?
Yeah. And she loved it. And I showed it to a friend of mine who is 35, hadn't seen it, loved it. He had some problems with some of the dynamics between Priscilla Lane and Cary Grant, as you can imagine. Some things don't carry over. But I was like, just ignore that and focus on the jokes.
Yeah.
But yeah, generation wide, it's just like, I think it really holds up. So yeah, it is my number one. Yeah.
Who else besides Cary Grant could mug his way through an entire film and make it work and have you just be tickled by it rather than, I mean, it's wonderful.
Cary Grant also hated his performance in that movie.
That's too bad.
It's
That's
yeah. He famously kind of was like, "No, I thought it was terrible in that." And like when you watch it, yeah, he is great because Cary Grant's like the most charismatic actor of all time. But when you watch it, yeah, as you said, he's just mugging. He's mugging to 11.
Yeah.
I thought he was so great. I
He's
thought
Cary
it was one
Grant,
of my favorite
so
performances of his because he's
Oh,
so like what skill to hold that level of energy throughout an entire film and to carry it to
that
he had
narrative
the
has
level
so
of
many threads he has to.
he
There
had
was
that
so-
level of energy you expect from a stage actor that you
it's-
want from a stage actor.
It's cohesive. Here you're shooting a whole bunch of different days over
Yes.
time, and you got to bring that back and make it cohesive. Yeah, tough.
He's so
It
consistent.
seemed like so many scenes that Cary Grant had were like he had his brother, he had his aunts, he had the cops, he had his fiance, and he was torn between all of them, and the conversations going on with all of them. It was phenomenal. And then he had props he had to handle, whether it was a decanter or the window box.
Phone.
It was just what he did. How he had to move. The blocking alone blows me away.
One of
Yeah.
my favorite like jokes that he does is they've just told him that there are bodies in the basement and the phone rings and he goes, hello. Oh, because there's no phone. Like he's just so out of it. Like it's got some really, as Dennis was saying when we talked about it the other day, some really good surrealist humor of like someone sneezes and Teddy goes, I must be catching cold. And she goes, no, Teddy dear, it was Reverend Harper that sneezed.
Well, I looked up the writer because I wasn't familiar with the writer. He didn't really do much else. That was his brilliant. He did other things. He had other films made, but nothing approached Arsenic and Old Lace for a script.
What's interesting too? We were just, oh my God, I just went completely blank. I just went completely blank on what I was going to say.
We'll have a chance to remember.
Oh, okay,
when we do
Kate,
number
I'm
ones,
gonna-
three of us will bring it up again.
Okay.
Can you believe it? I'm going to
Okay.
Oh, I just want to say really quickly, the fact that he thought that was his worst performance, I don't know if other actors can attest to this. We're not the best judges of what the best, like when I see, okay, I'm not going to go off on a tangent, but when I see actors post, nail the audition, just something I never do. I'm just more private and I'm not judging that, but nail the audition, killed that take. No, you didn't. And first of all,
How do you know? Right. Yeah.
second of all, we're some of the worst judges of what's good and what's bad and what we do. And the fact that, Bridget, I was going to say what you said, which is, I think one of the best things that he's done is a perfect example of a giant like Cary Grant thinking he was horrible in the film and absolutely
Well, what's interesting about that is that what my 89-year-old friend said, she said, I think this is the least Cary Grant role I've ever seen him in. She said he's not together and like suave like he is in everything else. And now
He's
I'm
not
thinking
controlling it. It's out of his control.
maybe that's why he didn't like it, was because it was so against his image as a person. Is because this role was not like who he was. So.
In Philadelphia Story, he was a little out of control too.
Yeah, but he's still like the puppet. He's the mastermind.
Yeah, he was still playing with Catherine. Okay, so Brigitte, you're next.
My number two is His Girl Friday, which has been mentioned several times.
Love it.
And what's great about it is, well, of course, Cary Grant, but Rosalind Russell deserved like a Best Actress nom for this. Where the hell was that for her?
Didn't she win the Academy?
No, she wasn't even nominated for it.
Holy shit. Okay.
I think comedies very rarely are comedic performances nominated for Best Actor or Best Actress, and very rarely are comedies nominated, or rarely do they win for Best Picture even.
Why didn't Cary win something for that? I don't even think he was nominated, did he? Right,
because comedies aren't taken as seriously. And well, anyway. But yes, His Girl Friday is great because it does have that quippiness. It's a play, and so I think when things are plays, there's something about it. It's you can see it in the actors, what a joy it is to do like 10 to 15 minute scenes where you're just like verbally sparring with the other person. It's so fun. And I would love that movie if it was just a short film of the first 15 to 20 minutes. You know what I mean? Like, I don't even care about the rest of it. Just them talking to each other, and Rosalind Russell going, anytime, any place, anywhere, we'll do. You know, just like she's got this great thing of like, you don't see this, I think, in roles a lot of the time for women of that time, but like she's got more than just like the typical read on a line, and you can really feel she's infusing a lot of her personality into it. I don't know. It was just it just felt very free. There's something about that felt so spontaneous, and like they just have this great friction, and it's great.
Which is I'm glad you brought that up because it just didn't get into my list, and because I figured somebody else would bring it up. So and the stage play that it's based on, the front page, Rosalind Russell's a man. That the entire that whole movie is like a gender flip of the play, and which is surprising because that movie has one of, I think, the greatest romantic beats ever in a movie, which is at the end when he's about to like let her go and he kind of flips on her. Cary Grant does, and she says something to the effect of like, what is that with you? And it's just this like little moment where these two people who love each other way too much, but like can't stand each other, they kind of look at each other like, oh, and they're suddenly on the same page. That it has some of the most breathlessly staged and written comedy of any movie, and I think it's as you said, with it being based on a play, a movie being based on a play is like a really tricky thing to do because it can feel too stagey. And it feel like people don't move naturally in it because they're trying to keep it. There isn't a lot of inherent cinematic opportunities in it because it's just talking. But His Girl Friday is one that it has enough energy that it never stops, and it like a rocket on rails. And Rosalind Russell's amazing.
I think Hawks had set up them overlapping their dialogue to make it more realistic, and I think it really clicked.
Sorry. No, I think they wrote superfluous sentences on the end of every line just so that they would run on and then somebody would
there's so many jokes that if you're not really listening you miss them. Like there's like a tiny little one where he's like, how do I look? And she's like, better than you ever have. And he's like, well, that's not much to brag about, you know. And then they just like move on. There's no time for you to laugh at it, and I was just like, what?
My favorite joke in it's when he's there reminiscing and he's telling the other, like the third man actor, Ralph Bellamy, who's amazing in it, just playing the complete clod. And he's telling her about this one time that they had a hotel room together, and then like the guy that
she was interviewing came over, and he like walked out of the shower, and he was like, and then he came over, and I walked out, and well, he didn't know I was in town. Just so good.
Okay, Todd, you're number 2.
All right. I'm continuing to throw a monkey wrench into our list.
No monkey wrenches
Great.
allowed.
All monkey wrenches. I continued to go with other, and I ended up choosing for my number 2 1948's Bicycle Thieves by Vittorio De Sica. And
I didn't know we were going to do other, including foreign films, but
yeah, I was like, there's so many like different genres and everything that.
Well, I want you to explain it, and this is completely allowable.
Okay.
Because Bicycle Thieves are probably it would be number 1 on thousands of people's list. So ever made. So
well, yeah, it's
so explain it if you haven't seen the film.
Has everyone seen it?
I don't think so.
Seen it.
Oh, I have.
I think they screened
I
it
know,
when I
but-
was in school, and it was like the one day I was.
Oh
sick.
no, it's
Not
if you
the one
haven't
day.
seen, if you
It's on
haven't
my
seen it,
list
you need
now.
to see it. But
All
it's
your movies are on
phenomenal.
my list, Todd.
What's that, Kate?
I said all your movies are on my list, Todd.
Well, this is streaming on HBO Max, so it's time to see it.
Yay!
It's set. It's part of the neo-realist period, and neorealism, as I'm sure everyone here understands, is going for a level of realism that was absent from a lot of the films at the time, the most popular films at the time. And one of the things I love about it is because it is neorealist, where you're on the streets of post-World War II Italy. You're really feeling it, smelling it, getting a sense of the poverty at the time. And it's a pretty straightforward story where a man, Antonio, he's unemployed. It's in the depressed economy of Italy at the time. He gets a job hanging up posters, which I can akin to, because part of my gigs is putting up posters for theaters in downtown Portsmouth. So I'm like, I got you right there. But unlike me, he needs a bicycle to get everywhere. So his bicycle is stolen. And as a result, he and his son Bruno are walking the streets of Rome looking for it. When Antonio finally manages to locate the thief, but he doesn't have any proof that this was the man who stole his bicycle, so he's got to kind of walk away from the whole thing. But if he doesn't have the bicycle, he can't do his job. And the ending is just, I won't spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it here, but
Don't spoil it. Don't spoil it.
And I know Chase understands, but it is a lyrical moment of sadness that is unexpected. It hits you in a place you weren't expecting. And I will say that it was mistranslated initially in America, called The Bicycle Thief. And there's a reason why the original title of Bicycle Thieves is very important, because without it, the ending doesn't have the same impact. So it's like less than 90 minutes of your time. Definitely check it out. But
it's shot so well.
It's just gorgeous. You're placed immediately in post-World War Italy, post-World War II Italy. Rome, yes, specifically.
Yes, it's in Rome.
And it's of a time that is, the desperation, as they say, is palpable. Again, it's recognizable in the times we're living in as well, and how any of us are like one bad piece of luck away from a situation like this. It's a very humanistic film. And I think I also just wanted to throw, I was going through, again, I am not versed well enough in the 1940s. This entire podcast is beautifully humbling for me. But I realized we weren't talking much about a whole lot of European films, and it seemed like a nice opportunity to as Chase said, under the umbrella of other, bringing one in and seeing if can't break up the algorithm a little bit.
Yeah, it's cool that you did that, because later on in the 50s and 60s, I'd be more versed in foreign films, but 40s.
I'm really glad this is happening now.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, good. I'm glad this worked out.
Yeah,
One of the
'cause
things-
Oh, not today, but yeah,
That's my
in the
main bracket
future.
of films anyway. So
One of-
it's different for me to be delving, as I said last time, into these kind of American films. So
One
you'll
of
be
the
hearing
things
all
that,
European next.
yeah, one of the things I put on my original list was foreign films, and I just listed a couple. Kurosawa did a couple of films in the 40s, but Bicycle Thieves is a phenomenal film if you haven't seen it. It's just phenomenal. It's shot very well. It pulls on your emotions.
Mm-hmm.
It pulls on your emotions.
I'm pretty sure the only scene I have seen from it is the ending. But
Oh, you
There
have.
you go, then. All right.
one of those. I think I was flipping through channels or something. Yeah,
Okay.
I have a long list of those.
Currently streaming on HBO Max. If you got it, go check it out.
Yeah, it's worth it. It isn't subtitled, by the way. At least I haven't seen it subtitled.
Yeah.
But you don't have to really pick up the subtitles. You know what's being said.
Yeah.
My number 2 is another Cukor film, Adam's Rib, Spencer Tracy, and Katharine Hepburn. I love Katharine Hepburn. And in this film, the premise is very simple. They're both attorneys. One's a prosecutor. The other one's a defense attorney. And a young girl shoots her husband, who's cheating on with another woman. And as it turns out, the prosecutor picks up the case, and it's a cut and dried case. Woman admits she shot him. There's witnesses that she shot him, and he comes home and goes, "I'm going to get this girl because he shot this man. Didn't kill him, but shot him." And Katharine Hepburn, who's a defense attorney, goes to her assistant, goes, "Go find me that girl." and of course, there's a court scene where they're battling one another, and they come home and they're in bed together. So it's like it's a funny premise. It's done well. Spencer Tracy plays a very stoic part, and Katharine Hepburn plays a very feminist part. And I mean that because she's taking the role of, it's okay if a woman shoots this man who's cheating on her. And she takes it from the feminist point of view. And forget what year. This was 1949. So this really started a trend where women could actually say, we're equal. And that comes out in this film all over, in court, in the bedroom, etc. And I just love the film. It's a Cukor film. Hepburn, to me, does a phenomenal job again. It's a little silly, I gotta admit, but I love the premise, and I love the film.
Yeah, they were a great team. Actually, they did some really cool films together. Yeah, I like that one. That one's nice.
Any other comments on my second choice?
I gotta watch it.
Yeah, I've never delved
I've never
into
seen it.
Tracy
Seen
and
it?
Hepburn.
I've heard of it.
I think it's because I love Tracy and Grant so much. I don't want to see them apart. But yeah.
Let's see, isn't that one written by their friend actor, and I can't remember his name, but anyway, they had a circle of people that would write for them, and knew them pretty well, so it fits them very well. The parts fit them.
Oh, this definitely fit, especially Tracy. Tracy playing the prosecutor, and Hepburn, of course, playing the feminist role.
Yeah,
it was very well done. If you get a chance to watch it, it's worth your time.
Chase, what's the name of it again?
Adam's Rib.
Okay. Oh, wow. Interesting title.
Yes, it
just wanna-
is.
I want to add, and this is rare for me, but I think it's because they're visually right in front of you, acting and in so many pieces together. And I don't know. Again, this is a part of Hollywood I've never explored before, so it's been great. But I love Spencer Tracy. I mean, is unbelievable, right? And just his, he's been lauded for his naturalistic approach to acting before it was even a thing.
Oh yeah.
Although, I mean, a little bit, I would say that Gary Cooper is on that level. I have trouble watching him and Lauren Bacall together as a feminist. I have trouble with it. I am not one that can't separate art from real life. And I saw myself watching Woman of the Year. Again, another film, if you guys, I'm sure you've seen it, most of you, maybe not, that is still to this day a progressive film. But I had trouble, I just had trouble.
Do you mean Katharine Hepburn, watching him and Katharine Hepburn together?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. You said Lauren Bacall, and I was like,
Oh.
we're talking about
Sorry.
Humphrey right now?
Well,
I
they're
can't
so
tell.
Lauren
similar.
Bacall.
Sorry,
like-
Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy.
I was like, I didn't know she was in that.
Thanks for
It's a weird
clarifying that,
omission,
Bridget.
Chase.
Yeah,
You didn't
yeah.
bring that up.
So
Well-
that's just my 2 cents. But both, you've got to give them for what they are. I mean, there is a huge part in film history that they have been a part of, but it's
What a love story
Totally true.
too. I mean, you have Tracy, who's a serious alcoholic and likes to fight, and then you have Katharine Hepburn, who tries to take care of him from the time she meets him until he dies.
I don't see it as a love story. I see her as I don't know. I see it as a karmic cycle. I think she really did love him, but it was because she didn't love herself enough, I think is what it came down to. And I think she could have given that love to herself, because the fact that it had to remain a secret and she couldn't even speak about their love until after his wife that he never left, deceased. I just don't see that as a great love story.
I didn't know
personally.
anything about their
Was it-
personal lives.
Well,
Which is crazy.
that's because
I thought you were talking about a movie. I didn't realize. I'm
Yeah.
up to date
Yeah, but
now.
it translates to their chemistry. It translates into. But I'm not taking anything away from it. It worked for them, and that was great. It just me personally, and I know it's not like me, so that's why I'm vocalizing it, to not be able to separate what's on film from real life. It was a weird experience for me, because I can take there's some great filmmakers that we don't even need to name, that people can't even watch their films because of what they've done in real life. I can see the art and what they've done because they're not there. I'm not but because they're in front of me, and I'm like, I don't know.
You mean
Well,
like
it's an
Polanski,
interesting-
for instance?
I love Polanski's films. I love his
But do you
films.
watch his films?
I love his films. Yeah,
Okay.
Chinatown, Rosemary's Baby.
I get what you're saying, Kate, about because acting, when you're cast with someone, it's about that art of making the connection. And then to know that 2 people, and this is why actors fall in love all the time on set, is because it's good casting. You have 2 people with amazing chemistry, and then it translates to something in real life. And then it's watching that almost feels like you're like everyone loves Mr. and Mrs. Smith, because that's the movie where you can see Angelina and Brad falling in love, and that's a part of it, or Kristen and Rob, and it's but it's a thing for a reason, which is great casting.
Yeah.
And then when you're watching it, it's a part of the art. It's inextricable in a way of knowing that these 2 people had this thing that you are witnessing, and that it overlaps with something that they had in their private lives. So I get
That's why I want to be cast with Todd at some point.
That's a really good point, Bridget. And maybe it's the part of me that is focused on the creation and the art, and not, quite frankly, all the bullshit hype that goes along with Hollywood. Yeah, it was real, and they had a great love affair. I had no idea about Angelina and Brad, and I'm not interested in it. I love Brad Pitt as an actor. He's great. I've never seen Mr. and Mrs. Smith. I probably never will. But that's a great example. You articulated it perfectly, and I think you get it, because
I'm sorry, Kate, but our next podcast is on Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Yeah.
So
I'll be there. I'll watch it if you need me to. And I'm not bad mouthing them. I'm just saying,
joking.
like, I want to
Just
see.
joking.
I just want to see the. I know. I just want to see the art. I don't give a shit about what they were in real. You know what I'm saying? I don't know.
Okay. We're missing
I'm
out
off my
on.
soapbox.
We're missing out
episode's
on
on
Freeman's
Vince
number
Vaughn's
2.
turn, and-
Freeman's number 2.
Stepping off.
So, my number 2 is, I teased it last week and earlier this episode. My number 2 is the 5th entry in my favorite film franchise of all time. There were 6. It's 1944's The Thin Man Goes Home,
Ooh.
directed by Richard Thorpe, starring William Powell, Myrna Loy, Lucille Watson. This is my personal favorite of the sequels. The first one is unparalleled. None of the sequels ever touched the first one, but I can watch these movies. I've watched the entire series all the way through at least twice this year, because I didn't have anything better to do. And it's William Powell and Myrna Loy are talk about perfect casting shit. And Kate, you'll love it because they never hooked up in real life, even though the public literally tried to force them to.
I don't mind if they hook up in real life. I just don't like when it overshadows. I know I'm.
Well,
such
it did overshadow, but they
soapbox.
didn't. Sorry, this headphone's about to die. But yeah, it's my favorite of the franchise. It's the first one not directed by W.S. Van Dyke, who directed the first 4, and it's I think the most satisfying mystery of the sequels. I think it's the only one that isn't set in a city. So it's interesting to have these characters. You think that before the 5th one they decide to shake up the setting, but I guess not. And who cares? Because it's wonderful. The kid isn't in this one, which is great because the kid's always the worst part of the movies.
Yeah.
And
Asta's there,
Asta
though, isn't
is
it?
there.
Isn't
yeah,
Asta
Asta's there? Yep. Asta's the dog. And yeah, it's just like a really fun little weird mystery that goes in kind of dark places.
Is this the one in San Francisco?
No. So 2 of them are set in I think 2 of them are set in San Francisco. 3 of them are set in New York, and this is the one where they go. I think it's Midwest. They go to Nick Charles, William Powell's childhood home, and so we meet his parents, who are shockingly normal.
I've seen this one.
It's great. It's probably the note that the franchise should have ended on, because Song of the Thin Man, which is the 6th one's okay. But this one does have the caveat, and I will say this one has an unfortunate scene where Nick Charles does spank Nora, which is weird, and it doesn't happen in any of the other movies. They don't have a relationship like that, but it is in this one, so keep that in mind. If that turns you off, maybe skip it. But
there's a scene in Song of the Thin Man where he's trying to spank his son, and he keeps visualizing on his butt.
That's the best scene in the movie.
So spanking, a thing with
and then it's the kid laughing at him. He's just like, yeah.
I'm sorry, Freeman.
Yes.
Who was the director again?
So this one's directed by Richard Thorpe. The first 4 were W.S. Van Dyke, and I don't know who did Song of the Thin Man. But I think Song of the Thin Man was made by somebody who had never seen any of the other Thin Man. Because it's really weird. It's like definitely the most serious. It's an interesting watch because it's like the first one with like actual stakes for the characters, but that's kind of why it doesn't work. But yeah, so Thin Man Goes Home, wonderful, weird. It's like Nick and Nora Charles walk into a Capra movie and then something horrible happens, as it usually does. And yeah, so my number 2.
I agree that the first one was the best, and I haven't seen that sequel, but I've seen a number of them, and they were slightly disappointing. But you love the characters so much; you love their interplay, and like you say, they were really great characters together. You love the interplay. William Powell was. I remember he had to take a couple of years off in between some of those because he had a heart attack and he had to recover. It was cancer or something like that.
He had cancer. His fiance died. He had a
when he came back. When he came back, they gave him a standing ovation as he walked onto the set. Yeah,
I think that's the 3rd one. I think it was another Thin Man that happened
Yeah.
between. Yeah.
And
But,
boy,
yeah.
was he a popular ladies' man? I mean, Jean Harlow,
Carol Lombard.
Carol Lombard, yeah, Clark
Oh, yeah.
Gable's wife. Apparently, you know, it's humor. It reminded me a little bit of Phil Silvers, Bilko, Sergeant Bilko series, where Phil Silvers had all kinds of lovely ladies after him, and you just go, really, really? Humor works really well, you know, as far as attracting the opposite sex.
Okay, Dennis, we're going to move
Right.
forward because we're getting a little short on time. But
Well,
you're number one, Dennis.
Are
I
we
can
going
make
to do number one with honorable mention, Chase? Or how are we doing
I'll
that?
tell you what. Since we're kind of short on time, do your number one. We'll discuss it briefly, and then do honorable mentions because I got 4 or 5. Yeah.
Yeah, mine was arsenic and old lace. So
have we talked about that?
we've talked that to death, I think. But yeah, so honorable mentions: Woman of the Year, Tracy and Hepburn, which is great up to the point where he has to domesticize her at the end, where she can't get around in the kitchen, and he kind of insists she does. That's pretty sexist. Still funny though. I mean, if you look at it, because she did really well with it. But you know, that would be honorable mention. My others were, you know, we've talked about already: Philadelphia Story, His Girl Friday. Yeah, and it was hard to choose because there's so many good ones. Those were just the cream of the crop from my perspective. But wow, you know, what a decade. And it followed 1939, the golden year in Hollywood, which had a bunch of great films that year. It seemed like it caught on, and they were going, well, let's keep making great films. Seems to work. And they did through the 40s.
Maybe we should have done a decade from 1939 to 1948.
Yeah, well,
I don't know.
we'd be really crowded then. Yeah.
Yeah, no shit. But yeah, I apologize for making it the 1940s. Kate,
Well, that's all right with me.
you're number one. You're muted.
Do you want me to give a list of what I've seen like Dennis did before? Should we all do that? You know, just so.
I'm sorry, what?
Do you want me to give a list of the films I've seen as well and then go through?
Well, yeah, you
Number
could.
one. Number one.
Okay, so really quickly, The Time of Their Lives, Abbott and Costello, The Great Dictator, obviously, Monkey Business, which is a Howard Hawks film I saw a while ago, Woman of the Year, Arsenic and Old Lace, Monsieur Verdoux, probably others I haven't mentioned, but that's overall. My honorable mention is His Girl Friday, Howard Hawks, just because of what we talked about earlier. I don't really need to go into it again, right? It's just the skill, the overlapping. Rosalind Russell and Grant were amazing. And I would say how a lot of people feel about Katharine Hepburn. Katharine Hepburn. I would say I feel about Rosalind Russell.
No, you mean Lauren Bacall?
That's why I stopped myself. Casey. And yeah, so that's my honorable mention. And I agree too, Dennis, that I really liked Woman of the Year, but the ending, it's a little bit tough to palate.
What's your number one?
My number one, surprise, surprise. Can you guess what it is? It's A Great Dictator.
I knew that.
Yeah. So, I mean, just for so many reasons we talked about before. But if you haven't seen this film, it's just over 2 hours. And just like Monsieur Verdoux, I would recommend, if you've got Criterion streaming or if you have it in your collection, watch the documentaries that go along with it that talk about it. This film, the U.S. did not want Chaplin to release it. And depending on what you read in the stories and how it's written in the interviews that you've heard, Chaplin either did or didn't know the severity of what was going on in Nazi Germany, because he was later quoted as saying, I would have never done the film had I known. I would have never made a comedy out of it. But I think, and who knows? I mean, it's hard to know what side is true. On the counterpoint, people have said well, that new Chaplin said that's wrong. He would have done the film anyway. He had this idea and he was going forward because he wanted to get the message out about how bad what was going on over there was. I will say most of it was shot in Chaplin studios in California, and it almost had, I think, with the juxtaposition of the settings, and that it was almost, well, it was stage-like, but it was also almost like theater-like. And I think the non-realistic aspects of those sets, and you could tell, no matter how much you repurpose and move around sets, I'm like, oh, that was in modern times. And he, of course, he's got Godard in it, although they were estranged at the time. You could not see any of that. There was a certain magic between, in my personal opinion, between Godard and Chaplin, and they're just magic together. But I think what made the film palatable was the fact that the settings were so artificial, and the slapstick comedy. First of all, there's no one that can make me. He makes me giddy like a little girl, Chaplin. I mean, I laugh through. I'm like a little kid through the whole thing. I mean, even when he drops the grenade down his pants, and he's just. I mean, just there's all these little things. And when they're in the airplane, the gentleman that I wrote his name down because I'm going to forget the actor's name, that he saves, that ultimately, you know, without giving the film away, they meet up in the end. Was it Reginald Gardner that played the general that he saves? So I think all of those things made, and Chaplin's, again, trite word, but genius, was able to make the context and the topic palatable. And I mean, just in the scene where I think it was, and some of the names too, garbage, spelled in the German spelling of like Garbitsch. Instead of Goebbels, he's got, you know, hair garbage. It's like all these names. And at one point, I think Garbage says to him, you can be the ruler of the world. You'd be the most powerful person ever. And Hitler, you know, he gets up as Hitler. Now there's two, as you guys know, there's two of them. There's the barber, who is basically the tramp, who is essentially, he speaks minimally. And then there is Hinkle, him is Adenoid Hinkle. So he plays two roles in this film. And when Garbage says that to him, he gets almost giddy and he starts prancing around his office, these balletic prances. And he's balancing the globe. It's like a big balloon it gives you chills. I mean, there's certain scenes that are, but only just the way that he was able to translate comedy and slapstick into such a atrocious topic was just beyond anything. And the ending, as we've talked about, the monologue at the end, it was transcendent. But it's interesting too, and later I found out through watching the documentaries that Lenny Riefenstahl actually commented on these scenes, which is what I learned was, so watching these scenes when he's giving his speeches like he would be at Nuremberg, it echoed Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will. And from what I understood and learned, the crowds weren't as big as what they were made out to be, but she was who she was, and she had innumerable funds and made these crowds out to be that hundreds of thousands of people were viewing these speeches when they in turn really weren't. So it said. And so he was able to recreate that. And just, he really satirized everything, but in a way that got the point across, and made it palatable, but also echoed the severity of the situation. And there was one quote that I really found poignant, in the fact that, like, here is this Hinkle character, Hitler, they're completely self-loathing in what they're doing and what they're trying to accomplish, and thank God didn't, which was at one point, Hinkle's character says, well, brunettes are troublemakers. they're worse than the Jews. And here he's brunette himself in a room surrounded by brunettes. And it just, anyway, that's my number one. I could go on. I won't. Watch the film.
Fantastic, Kate. And if you haven't seen The Great Dictator, you should.
The one thing I do want to add, Dennis, I think partway through, Carl Struz became the cinematographer because something happened and Chaplin kind of lost faith in his, was it Roland, Totaro? Is that
Toland, or Tothero, I'm sorry, yeah.
So he replaced him actually as a cinematographer. I just found that out today.
Number one.
Arsenic and Old Lace.
I'm sorry about that. I will cut this out. But I was so pent up to talk about
Why cut it out? Leave it in there. It's real, man. It's real.
I don't have an honorable mention, but I do have a bone to pick. I don't like Philadelphia Story.
You don't?
I don't, and this is why.
Okay, how can I mute her? How can I mute her? I'm muting you now.
I just didn't think that it was as effective as a story as I expected it to be. I think maybe because it was hyped for me a little bit.
Because they had story in the title.
Yeah.
Threw you off.
It wasn't about Philadelphia.
Right.
What? No. No, I just I don't like that what changes her character is that they make her think that she slept with someone while she was drunk and then she has to, right? Like they all play like, you know, you shouldn't have done, like there's this weird thing where like, you know, she doesn't remember and like she's had this blackout and it's kind of dicey to like fuck with someone's memory like that. And
not cool. Not
it didn't make me laugh. And that it kind of, I was like, oh, this is, and we're supposed to be like, oh, she's come back down to earth. She's a human being. And I'm just like, oh, it was rough for me. It was rough.
I think, Dennis, that explains the generational differences.
Yeah, that's true. That's probably true.
Well, also, I'm watching it now, which is true. Like, I watched it for the first time for this podcast. So very much through a lens of like, is this going to connect with me comedically? And it kind of upset me a little bit in a different way.
I can understand.
I don't think that's how that scene. That's not how that scene played to me.
Go back and watch it. That is exactly what is fucking happening.
Well, no, I know what you're talking right. She thinks something happened, but I feel like nobody else.
They all play into it. They all play into this like intimate, and they're playing with like her mind. And Cary Grant especially is like, you know, what you did last night and stuff like that. I don't remember the exact lines, but seriously, go back and watch it. They all let her hang in that.
I always read that scene as it's just like a well, I will. I've seen that movie like 100 times.
It is used to make her come back down to earth and admit that she has faults and that she's not this perfect fucking goddess. And it's like not a great. I'm like, I could get on board with this if we had a different way of changing her character. And also, I didn't think she was that stuck up to begin with. I was like, what's the problem?
What? Yeah, really? Why
she seems great.
So, yeah.
So, what's your number one?
I love
my number one was Arsenic and Old Lace, of course. Sorry, Kate, I cut you off.
Oh, you didn't know? I said I love Bridget's points. I love all your points. I love our group. I'm just gushing. I wish I could give you a hug.
I love it too, and I like disagreeing because it's helpful. I think it's one of my favorite things about people having lots of knowledge and therefore different opinions, and you get kind of like all the facets of the diamond and you know, different perspectives, which is great.
Well, I love
Yes,
the Philadelphia Story, and are you talking about the scene where she comes back in Cary Grant's arms?
No, I'm talking about the morning after.
Oh, the morning after. Yes. I'm going to have to go back and relook at that.
Yeah, it's too long. They let her hang in it, and there's this like big implication of like, you know, there's like silent judgment from everyone pretty much, it feels like, where everyone's like, I saw you coming out of the such and such last night with and she's like, oh my God. And you can tell immediately she's like, what happened to me last night? And it was like, oh. little rough.
I might have.
You and I
missed that.
completely read that scene differently.
Yeah, no, definitely
okay.
go back
Me
and
also,
watch it. It's
Freeman.
too much.
Me also.
I
So I'm
watched
gonna have
it
to
probably like
relook at
5
it.
times last year. Just in
Well, you guys
quarantine.
all know my input on the red shoes. It was completely, Bridget, I don't know if you appreciate it, but it's
I
kind
didn't
of
see
on
it,
par.
but
Yeah, it's on par with like what you're saying, where everyone has like a different lens of perception, but also I think with like the red shoes, it was just kind of like it's recurring and for women in cinema. So without going into that, I'm not taking away anything from how well the film was, but just like we can do better. We can do better.
Yeah.
Okay, Todd, you're number one.
All right. Well, I am here once again to throw a monkey wrench into and take full advantage of the.
But I love your monkey wrenches.
Yes, I'm. That's what I'm here for. And it is October, so we're approaching Halloween. So I focused on a rather movie with some terrifying moments, and I'm 100% honest about that. But also a genre that we haven't touched upon yet that we'll probably touch upon more as we move forward, and that is Disney's 1942 Bambi.
Ooh.
Yes.
And a major reason I kept coming back to this one is because I always found, I mean, I have kind of a love-hate relationship with a lot of the Disney animated films. But one of the things that has aged really well about Bambi is the fact that the villain in it is man. Like 100%. And in fact, when the Australian wildfires were going berserk, and there was an image of a kangaroo, a silhouette of a kangaroo jumping with flames in the background, it actually reminded me of an image from Bambi during the huge forest fire at the end, and how, you know, obviously Bambi's mother gets killed, and that incredibly effective moment during the wintertime and everything just goes quiet. It's horrifying. I don't return to Bambi very often, actually. You know, people joke about it going, oh, Bambi's, you know, mother getting killed is traumatic. It is. I'm like, you know, if you go back and watch the film now, you know, it's masterfully balanced in terms of its wonderment, its comedy, its I say humanism, but it is about the animals, and in fact, human beings is the problem and the threat. And I still see that more than ever across our globe. And I think, and it's funny because when Bambi was released, I believe that it was a box office bomb. I don't think it did very well, and I believe that Disney had to put Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs back in the theaters to recoup the money they were losing from Bambi.
Wow.
Run the dwarfs back out there.
Yeah. So Bambi kind of found its way years later, and you look back at it now, and it's a startlingly, especially with the Disney films that were being released at the time, startlingly mature effort. Pinocchio also came out in the 40s, and while I like Pinocchio and I appreciate the themes running in it, Bambi just seems to just delve right into my gut and just pull straight out. It's actually it's almost like comparable to the adaptation of Watership Down to a certain extent.
Of what, Todd?
Watership Down.
Oh.
Yeah. So I think any film that's able to communicate that amount of feelings in like an hour and 10 minutes from 1942, still in the year 2021, is worth looking at under the other. And I promise I will start looking at comedies in the 1940s. Obviously, I am awful at the comedies.
Todd,
that's a great pick, though.
I'm so glad you did this. Are you kidding? This adds so much more depth and variety to the pod.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm apologizing. This is great.
I want to say that I have a great emotional attachment to Bambi because you know, it was made before I was born, but when I was 3, my dad brought me a record player, and it was a 45, and he had me 2 45s. One was by Disney, one was Johnny Appleseed, and the other was Bambi. So I listened to those, and I learned the songs and the thing. Then when I saw the movie, I had to read the books. So I read Bambi and Bambi's Children. And if you haven't read the books, you see where that whole attitude came from that Todd was talking about the perspective on man and on the animals from the books, which are just incredible.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, something that Bambi and the Great Dictator have in common is that I have
There's a film.
is that I have seen each of them once, and I remember very crisply like images and sequences from both of them because of how good they are.
I have
drop little April showers beaming.
Yeah.
We drove up. Yeah, I love that song. My granddaughters love that song too.
They do.
I have never seen Bambi or Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Is this something I should go back and watch? I never.
Yeah.
Totally.
Sure.
They're on Disney Plus, and they're like an hour out of your time, an hour and change. They're honestly.
I haven't seen Bambi since I was like 5, but
Ditto.
Yeah.
Snow White holds up. That movie.
When I was young, my parents never took me to see movies unless it was like Tall in the Saddle or Red River or something.
Oh.
It was some John Wayne Western. But I never seen any animation, and I never really got into animation. So Bambi is worth seeing.
They're so beautifully done, all the hand, no computer illustrations. Not that those aren't great too, but the hand
nothing's
drawing
like it now.
and what they had to do to make that work is it's fascinating. Yeah.
Okay, so my number one it's probably a film you've never heard of.
Arsenic and Old Lace.
I think it's been on the list 15 times already. Arsenic and Old Lace. So let's don't talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. Cary Grant was awful. The window box was stupid. The blocking was stupid.
Jeez, there's really no accounting for taste anymore.
You thought Karloff was scary. I mean, come on.
I never saw Boris Karloff. I did see, what's his name? Jim Macy?
Raymond Massey?
Raymond Massey. He's the one that played Jonathan.
Right.
Yeah, I loved him in that role.
Yeah, it was great.
Even the fake makeup with this, where Peter Lorre fucked him up.
Yeah, right.
Since this is the last time we'll talk about it, little shout out to how the aunties run like they trot.
I'm assuming that Freeman's number one is not going to be arsenic. Go Freeman.
Did you want to do your special mentions, Chase?
Oh, honorable mentions are so fucking many.
Right, that's what I meant.
Woman of the Year, The Great Dictator. I cannot say enough about Monsieur Verdot. If you get a chance to see that, if you haven't seen it, I love the way it was structured. And I've already spoken about this, so I won't go into it too much. But The Great Dictator and Monsieur Verdot, Mon cher Verdot, was that his last, did you guys say?
It was, so I don't want to give the ending away, but it's long of the short, it's the ending of The Tramp, if you will.
Oh, okay, yes, I understand that. But was that his last film?
In America, and then he left. But he did a couple of scant ones, I think, after.
Okay.
We have Countess from Hong Kong, right? That was him, wasn't it?
That I don't know.
Yeah.
I'd have to check, but when you introduced me to Monsieur Verdot, I just loved it. I've seen it twice. It was so well structured. I can't believe, it's like if you look at the Capra films and the Hitchcock films, there's a chronology to the way they're shot and the way they're edited, the way they're put together. Monsieur Verdot was put together a little differently, and I like the way it was done.
And this is interesting and kind of goes against what I said with the echoing of real life and cinema. And this I don't mind because it brings so much heart to the film. and you see a part of him that echoes cultural, socio issues that need to be talked about. But Todd, this also was a huge flop at the time. Like, it's just one of those films that, you know, a lot of times, unless it's like Siskel and Ebert, and even then they messed up, it's like never listen to the critics, because this is like what Chase said. I can't say enough good things about it. There's a few documentaries that go along with it on Criterion, and it is masterful in so many ways. It's long. There maybe are some parts that linger, but not bothersome. And I felt just, yeah, it's an unbelievable.
Can I just say one thing, Kate, to you?
Can say anything to me, Chase.
Okay. One of the things I did not like about Monsieur Verdot, is Martha Ray. I just couldn't get over her acting. It was just, it stood out to me.
Over the top. Well, she's
over the top.
Stage actor.
Very theater, yeah. But
over the top plus.
Yeah, but she still was such a great part of. They complemented each other. I will say, real life translating to film, you can see how much what Chaplin was going through in his personal life. Even watching, like, 7 years later this was filmed, I mean, just how much he had aged. And it just was just go see the film, watch it, it's great.
And well, supper time is calling.
And Freeman, just to further answer your thing, Stray Dogs by Kurosawa, Bicycle Thieves, which Todd has mentioned. I love the films, but they're foreign. I didn't press them, but they were out there. We could have brought them up, and I'm glad Todd did.
Yeah.
So you're number one.
So my number one was the Philadelphia Story, but since we've talked about that, I'm gonna bring up another one that I wasn't sure where to, and it's going to lead into my honorable mentions. So my number one that I'm going with is 1942's Cat People, directed by Jacques Tourneur, starring Simone Simon, Kent Smith, Jane Randolph, produced by Val Lewton for a budget of, I think, $5 and a handshake. Val Lewton was like a famous huckster of Hollywood. I haven't seen most of his movies, but I guess hucksters, he knew how to make stuff work on no money. And Cat People is a really effective little horror movie. So the thing is, again, they had no money. So it's about a woman who turns into a leopard and kills people a lot. And they couldn't afford really showing her turn into a leopard like the Wolfman or anything. So it's just a big cat that they got somewhere that they let loose on the set like 5 times. But the way that they work around it is it's all atmosphere. There's a very famous part where a woman's being stalked that has a famous kind of revolutionary misdirect at the end of the sequence. And yeah, it's dripping with atmosphere. It's a really, again, I'm sure the acting and the sexual or gender politics of the time are dated, but I think it really holds up. It's a very good atmospheric little chiller. And I wanted to dedicate my honorable mentions to the horror genre of the 40s because there was a lot of really cool stuff going on there, starting with 1945's Dead of Night, which is a quirky little anthology horror movie from England that not only revolutionized, it didn't start, but it kind of popularized and the anthology format that we still see today with movies like Creepshow, Trick or Treat, and TV shows like The Dark Side, all those. And also it had like an impact on metaphysics. look up. It has a very interesting Wikipedia page. And then House of Frankenstein, directed by Earl C. Kenton, which is the best of the Universal Monster team-up movies, and the Universal Monster movies of the 40s, specifically of the 40s, because they didn't start teaming up until then, but they'd mostly been established in the 30s. Chase, and it really influenced the cinematic universe format of Busters today. At 80 years before they started. And then lastly, The Spiral Staircase, directed by Robert Siodmak, who's a very interesting filmmaker of that time period. Also very good at making a lot of atmosphere on like no money. But The Spiral Staircase is famous because it is pretty much the first slasher movie. Mm-hmm. It's weird. It's not great, but it's definitely worth watching if you're interested in the beginning of the genre and stuff. So yeah, Spiral Staircase, House of Frankenstein, Dead of Night, and Cat People are all, and also The Uninvited, which is a delightful ghost movie that is very British. And yeah.
This is a great Halloween list.
Where can we?
There we go.
Are those all on YouTube? Criterion, like what Criterion?
They're on Canopy, Criterion. I know Criterion should have Cat People and Uninvited because those are both. There's a lot of movies called The Uninvited that are apparently terrible. I've only seen this one.
They weren't invited, so
they were not invited.
That was horrible.
All these people that did not receive an invite.
Freeman, did you ever see the remake of Cat People by Paul Schrader?
No, it's been on my list for a long time.
Paul Schrader?
Paul Schrader. It's a completely different movie.
It's just completely like
completely
sex
different.
And blood soaked, and
it's Malcolm McDowell.
That
would be like the one Paul Schrader film I haven't seen.
The doc you can see is literally just walking around naked through the whole thing. It's a completely misogynist.
Well, that's why Gene Siskel liked it.
You guys, I'm wondering. I just think of Bowie and his song. Did he base it off of the movie?
That song's from that movie. It's from the Schrader movie. Yeah.
For the Paul Schrader movie, yeah. Okay, cool. Wow. Okay.
It's just such schlock, but it's such 1982 schlock.
Are you're a Schrader person as well? Are you guys big fans?
Schrader?
I'm not.
I'm a Schrader fan.
Huge fan. I've never seen like Taxi Driver.
Are you a fan?
You haven't seen Taxi Driver?
I haven't seen Taxi Driver.
You haven't seen Taxi Driver?
When we get to Scorsese, I'm in trouble because I've seen most of the big ones, but like I haven't seen Taxi Driver. I haven't seen Casino.
Well, that is the big one.
That is the big one, yeah.
I've seen After Hours.
After
that's a good one.
That's a fun one. That's a
and
fun
Paul
one.
Schrader's latest movie, The Card Player, is great. I did see that.
Oh, I can't wait to see that. Can't wait to see that.
It's tough.
Oscar Isaac is one of my favorite actors.
Yeah, I know.
So
are
we shooting for next Saturday?
Todd, what did you just say? I couldn't hear what Todd just said.
Oh, I just said watch Taxi Driver before this group gets to the 70s.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
There'll be a lot of movies that I need to watch before we get to those.
Saturday is the day before Halloween, I want to say.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a wonderful time with podcasts. Everybody was wonderful except for Todd, who fucked up the whole thing by coming up with others. Others. The Uninvited showed up with others. But anyway, I'm glad he did. It was so wonderful, Todd. Thank you so much. And
thank you for embracing my 1940s comedies, just hopelessness. I appreciate it.
But anyway, I love you guys all, and I will meet with you again on email in the upcoming week, and we will do 1940s directors and actors. Thank you for watching The Love of Films, a production of Left Bank Films. Today's chapter deals with films of the 1940s, our favorite comedies, and other films from the 1940s. We hope you enjoyed it. For further information about our podcast and other podcasts and the results of this podcast, please visit leftbankfilms.com, the love of film. Thank you very much.